So, as I said, my name is Milica Rakic. I live in Windsor, and the topic that what I'm going to present today is cooperative group learning in virtual environment. It is such a big title, and basically all I'm going to actually do is tell you what my one day looks like. So, what do I do in class, and how? So, um, the first quadmester. So first quadmester, I was teaching in virtual school, and during this second quad, I went back to a physical school to teach there, and I was teaching in hybrid model until the closure. So I was able to experience both models of teaching in the pandemic, during the pandemic, and I must say that between two models, so the completely virtual and then the hybrid, at least the way the hybrid model was um, organized in our board, I found hybrid model to be hard for me and for students. And I felt like we were constantly playing a catch-up game the entire time. During asynchronous days, I tried to sort of lure students into the class and make them come and participate. But because that was not happening across the school nor across the department, it was hard. So after an asynchronous day, they would be coming to class confused. So we were constantly playing like a catch-up game. So between the two, and I'm saying only from the experience of the hybrid model that we had, so every other day for 3.5 hours, I preferred virtual school for the ability to develop a routine. So after experiencing both. So the idea of my today's session is to share my experience in a virtual school and teaching inquiry-based class, or as close to inquiry as possible that I can think of at this moment. So this is just my recipe for the class. So I won't discuss many possibilities, how you can do different things. I'm not going to tell you the story of, let's say you have a flour and a sugar and egg, and then you can make pasta, you can make cake, you can make bread, you can make cookies. I'm just going to tell you one thing. I'm just going to give you one recipe for my class. Let's call it spaghetti. So, I want to, this is not a recommendation. This is just what it is. It's just my experience. And I hope that it will start a conversation and will help us. That conversation will help all of us to navigate this virtual environment. So I do, like everybody, I think, agree that the best way to teach is in a physical classroom. But since we cannot do that, we have to do our best to engage students in virtual classroom. And the time that students and teachers spend in virtual classroom, it has to be useful, it has to be meaningful. What I want to say is it has to be meaningful for all of us. So for the teachers and for the students. I'm trying to move on to the next slide and I am unsuccessful, but hey, okay, here I am. So just a few things here. So I use two platforms, and I use Brightspace and Teams. So I asked Chris to make a poll so that I just know approximately how many of us are using Brightspace and how many of us are using Teams. So can we have that right now, Chris? Yes?
I forgot to make the poll.
Okay. Okay, it doesn't matter.
We can use our cameras, and we could do the hands up thing.
Oh, we can do the hands up thing. I use the hands up thing in the class. I am not familiar with Zoom, so I'm just afraid if I click something that I will disappear, something will disappear. So I'm just going to keep it the way it is. And if somebody can kind of.
How about we type into the chat? You can give us a yes or a no. And Milica, you can ask us your question.
Okay, so my question is, do you use Brightspace? Okay, I don't know where to look at where is my chat right now? Sorry.
If you go to the bottom of your screen, there should be a chat bubble there.
Okay, my nav bar is at the top of my screen.
The
Oh,
quick
yes, sorry, to
first,
the top.
yeah, the quick first glance, it's looking like about 50-50 split,
Oh,
yeses
okay,
and
perfect.
nos.
Okay, and how about Teams? So are you using Teams?
It's a lot of nos with the odd yes on there.
Okay, so a lot of no's with,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I do, so thank you for this. So what I do use both, and I do like features of both. Okay, so I'm very big on a structure. I like routine, I like structure, I like protocols. And I think that because I'm like that, then I can help students the best way if I have my classroom set up that way. So in the beginning of the course, I definitely provide clear expectations to students about the expectations. Okay, so what do interactions in cooperative group look like? What does it mean that the group is functional? What is the responsibility of each role within a group? How they should communicate while explaining their reasonings, how to learn, right? How they should be listening to others. So all of those things I do, whether it's a virtual or non-virtual, but in a virtual classroom, all of those things are still possible, and I still insist on all of them. So I revisit those expectations quite often. And uh, in order for students to acquire those skills for good collaboration, that takes time. And I also share what former students, like testimonials from former students. And the thing that I do is I take time at the beginning of every course. I do take time, and I do take time to introduce with students with this virtual environment setup. So they need to know where they're going to find worksheets. They need to know where they're going to find supporting materials. They need to know how am I using announcements, and so I explain how and where everything is, and it takes time to cover all those concepts, but they do get used to it. And once they get used to it, it becomes a routine and they know where everything is. So I use two platforms. I use Brightspace and I use Microsoft Teams. And in Brightspace, I use virtual classroom feature and I use the announcement. And in Teams, I use a great feature that I really, really like, and it's called Class Notebook. And I also use uh, Teams for group discussions. So I would like to share my screen now. So just give me a second so that I can actually walk you through and show you what I do. Now, since we don't have a lot of people that are using that, maybe it's a choice not to use. Maybe it's not. So if it's a choice not to use, maybe this will change your mind. So I do have groups here set up, and this is the feature that I really, really like. It's called Class Notebook. So if we go into Class Notebook, that's basically a virtual binder that is easy to set up, and it's easy to navigate, and it's easy to distribute pages. So if I go into content, I show students what I have. So we do have a handbook section and videos. So in the handbook, I post basically the handbook. So I use Chris Meyer's notebook, and that's available for everyone to use. I've been using it for many years, and that's what I use to actually teach inquiry-based course that right now I'm trying to move into this virtual setup and virtual environment. So this is the handbook. And if you take a look, every student has exactly the same sections. So every student has the same sections, which are handbook, homework pictures, videos, and so on. So they know where to find, and since everybody has the same, then there is no confusion there. And now I use this. So for every lesson, what I provide a video. So at first I thought, okay, since we are online, I'm going to do live demos, and I would just turn on camera and I'm going to show, and I'm going to explain, and we're going to have a conversation. And that did not go well at all, at least not in my experience. The video was always choppy, I was pixelated, students couldn't hear me. So it was not a good thing. So I realized I cannot do that. I had to provide something that is of a better quality and it doesn't take a lot of time, because I found that in this virtual classroom, if we want to do the inquiry and if I want to engage students, that takes time. Um, and we are moving slowly through the material. At least at the beginning, we move very slowly and then we speed up. So I started pre-recording, and I thought that that was easier for me instead of looking for the ones that are that already exist somewhere on YouTube that I could use. And they know where to find that, okay? And so that's the organization of this class notebook. And also, since I'm here, I can also show what the expectation is. So every student is either opening this electronic or this handbook in the OneNote app, and then they can type, or most of them are printing or were given printed handbooks. And then what they do, they have to take picture of their work. So they would just upload the picture, and they know that that's an expectation. And that way I have access to the work, to the homework, to like everything's there, and everything's there that belongs to that same student. Okay, so that's why I really like this class notebook. I use that for distribution of this material and the navigation. And to distribute a page here is really easy. It takes 3 clicks to do that. So I'm going to back now. I'm going to go back here. So that's the virtual setup for the where they can find stuff. And then I'm going to explain you guys how my timeline goes. So every class I begin actually in Brightspace. And some people might say, well, it's confusing to use both platforms. I didn't find it confusing for students. Students didn't find it confusing. So for some reason, it's working and they're not complaining. So every class, I do begin in virtual classroom in Brightspace. And what they do, there is a great feature in Brightspace, which is a multi-user button screen. I forgot what exactly the name is. And when I use that, then they just hover with their cursor, and the cursor is showing their name. And they're choosing their roles that way. And I snip this, and I literally print this for the day, and then I have it. And once I have it, that's my thing that I use to navigate throughout the class. So I know exactly who is speaker, who is manager, who's reader. So I know whom to and how to refer when I go and I speak to them in a group. So that is just for my reference and as a guide through the lesson. And I like to start the class with a poll question, and that's related to the concept from the previous class. And we use in Brightspace a poll. I love the feature of poll in the Brightspace. I use that all the time when I am in Brightspace. So we go through the question. So first, the protocol is the same as it would be in the physical classroom, except that they're not using respond cards, but they are answering the question on their own, just them and their brain, sort of. And then they go into teams, and they take maybe 5 minutes in teams to discuss. And in order to speed up the process, I tell them the order at which they need to present their answer. So I would say, okay, we're going to do it in order: speaker, reader, recorder, manager. So speaker goes first and gives the answer and explains. It's a very good skill. I love using that in a physical classroom as well. It's really amazing how powerful that strategy is, uh, and how powerful that this how much they learn from that discussion. And anyway, they come back to the class, they answer the question again, and then we're all warmed up for the lesson. So we introduce the lesson. I share my screen and I show them, okay, this is the lesson that we're going to work on today. And I literally walk them through. It has so many parts. And we uh, I tell them, okay, now is the time for us to break up into teams. So I give them about 30, 40, 45 minutes per activity that they need to do. And and then we leave bright space, and then I meet them in teams. So once I go into teams, what I do, I go and I visit every group. So I check on the progress, to answer the question, and they learn. The first time I go into group, speaker is going to tell me, what's going on, where they are, and we're going to have a discussion. So I'm having a discussion with every group that takes time, and but in order in order for them in order for me to make sure that I'm going to visit and speak to most of the groups, and I should speak to all of them, all groups, then I usually tell them, okay, when you get to this point, this question, make sure you call me. And very quickly they become, or from my experience, as I said, from the grade 12s that I had and now grade 11s, they are comfortable calling, requesting my attendance, and I come and I discuss with them those questions. I don't use cameras. I don't even insist on using cameras. And honestly, I do find them also distracting. I don't get that visual feedback that I get in the classroom from students. I just have pictures and then someone's dog and someone's cup and someone's, like, it's so out of a context. At least that's my impression of that. So I don't insist on cameras, and most of them don't use. But what we do share a whiteboard. I love the feature of sharing a whiteboard. And we either use the group whiteboard where everybody can write, or sometimes if that doesn't work, then I share my whiteboard, and then through the conversation with them, I write. They know that my expectation is when I join in that there will be active discussion, okay, and that I won't have muted mics. I won't see muted mics. And if that happens, and it does happen, then I talk to them and I really push them. I go over the expectations. I make sure that they understand. And so far, that worked. So when I'm sharing a whiteboard and when we're having a conversation, one thing that I noticed that I really like is that they're much more likely to use, and they're trying to use a proper terminology and physics vocabulary in that group discussion. And when they're explaining to me what I need to write, where should I put things, they cannot just point and say, okay, well, look at this, or wave their hands. And I really like that. And I also like when I'm in a group with 3 or 4 of them, it is almost like I don't know, like a radio show or a podcast. It has a different feeling than talking to few people when you're surrounded with the whole class. So there is something to it. At least that's my impression. So during this time, when I speak to them, I would say, okay, guys, I really liked how you explained this. I think we have a good understanding of that. Would you be okay with you helping me with this question when we go back and when we discuss as a class? And that's what we do. When we go back into the class, then managers, they always raise their hands if they're done with a task that was assigned. And then if I see 5 out of 6, I know 5 groups have done. And then based on that, we go and we either extend time or we start going over that that activity. Now, I do go and I do sort of quote unquote take up the questions from the handout, and that's not what I do in physical classroom. I don't do that. We don't go and we are not taking up the questions when we are in a classroom. We wrap it up, we talk about ideas, but I found that in a virtual classroom, I felt like I should do that because it provided some resource for the students who might have technical difficulties during class, couldn't hear, got kicked out. So I felt like I should provide something. So instead of me talking, I start kind of conversation, and then the students that already know which questions are going to help me out, they help me out. So the speakers from those groups, they said, okay, well, group 1 has this about this question. This is how we talked about it. This is what we ended up concluding. So when that part of the session, I do record, and that goes pretty smoothly. Okay, there is no awkward silence because they're already prepared. And then we go back and repeat the process. And basically that's my day. That's how I go through. This is what I do. And then the announcement feature at the end of the class, I use the one in the bright space, and I use it as a class summary. And it's very short and basically says, today we did this. Here is the video for one part, the second part, third part, how many parts we had. Here's the homework. See you tomorrow. And I do offer extra help beginning and after. Students do stay, students do come early. So it works okay. And it feels like I'm talking a lot. So this is the last thing I'm gonna say is I do ask students at the end of every year, every course, about their feedback. And I do ask just one question, which is, what's your take on physics and what would you say to a grade 10 student about physics? But this year, I also, beside that question, I had a question about what was your experience of the physics classroom in virtual school. So I posed that question to the grade 12s that I had in first quadrimester. Now, the grade 12s that I had in first quadrimester, they were not my students from grade 11. They were from different schools. And in grade 11, they had, they didn't use group work. They were, they experienced a traditional method of and traditional style of teaching. And and I was very curious, what are they going to say about their experience being virtually and having a group work and collaborating? And so what was their experience? And I was happy. I was happy with the feedback. And they said that actually nobody complained about the group work, about a collaboration, about the structure within that. And they found, everybody preferred to do experiments on their own, but they were already prepared that that's not going to happen. So they found those pre-recorded videos helpful. And they did complain about the pace of the course, and I complained about the same thing. So we were kind of on the same page regarding that. And I must say that was the experience from the students that chose to be in a virtual school. So now these students that I'm teaching right now didn't choose that, they chose to be in person. So their experience might be different. But that was one day of my, this was 150 minutes of my day. And that's kind of the recipe that I'm using. And by no means I want to say that that's a recommendation. I just want to kind of start the conversation about that and to see what works well for you. What suggestions do you have? What does not work at all? And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Melissa. There was a couple questions that maybe you probably can't see because they've been scrolled through the chat. So I just wrote them down. Lisa asked, do you provide feedback right in the notebook feature of Teams?
I don't provide a written feedback, but I do speak to students, and I do refer if I take a look and I see I do provide some. Ideally, I would like to provide written, but me personally, I didn't find time for that. But I do verbally when I'm in a group. I would comment on the good things this was. And yes, so what I do, they know whoever is a recorder of this, so that's just like in a regular classroom. So I look through their notebook that day, and then the next day when they switch roles, then I look those notebooks. So I don't look through all of them every day. I look only through six, because I have 6 groups.
Jeff asked, have you attempted any group-based testing, or have you been doing your assessments?
Okay, so group-based testing in the virtual classroom, I did not try that. I wanted to, because I do have a group component when I am in the classroom, so I use that. And but I have not tried that in the virtual. But I was thinking to my next test that I should try. Anyways, I cannot comment anymore on that.
Are there any more questions for Melissa before we move on to Ashley? Perfect. So thank you very much. We will have more time for questions after Ashley's as well, if any come up. But without further ado, we will switch over to Ashley here and get a little bit on how she's doing this Gradeless stuff virtually.
Woot, woot. Okay. And just to like piggyback off of the person that had the admin coming down on them for teaching for so long, I'm sorry that happened to you. We basically, like, I know for me, I just did a quick poll to see where my students were at, like if they had to take care of kids at home, if they didn't. So then I was able to make, there was one kid, for example, that's having to take care of his sick father. So I was able to make some like concessions for him and then just work with everybody else. So it's unfortunate that admin made that decision for you instead of you guys being able to just kind of be kind and do that. So hopefully people can see a Going Gradeless screen right now. Is that good, Adam? Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to kind of walk through. I got a new laptop for Christmas, and so I'm just playing around with the new stuff that is available. So we are all in this digital world together, trying to take like up in the top right corner is an in-person lab, hands-on activity piece. So you're trying to take that, make it digital, put it online, and then some of you may be in the same boat as me, where you also then have a small things in the background constantly running around, stealing all of your time and attention too. And so then it's how do you balance and how do you get what we're doing, like how do you recreate what you had in the classroom and make it function in a virtual online space? And so my goal for today is just to kind of give you a couple of tips and tricks. Hopefully you can take some of them home and use them right away in the next couple of days. And if you want to continue the conversation, I'm happy to do so. This literally could be like a whole conference in itself. It isn't though. I'll keep it at 30 minutes, but that's what we're going to talk about today. So the whole goal of digital learning is to keep your head above water. And we're treading and we are like, it's a marathon, guys, and we are drowning and it is exhausting. Like I'm finding by like 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm ready to go to bed at the end of the day. And I'm sure many of you are in the same way. And so my goal in Gradeless initially was started in person. So just a quick background, I'm from the Waterloo School Board. I was part of a team that was given one of those ministry grants. They were called TLLP grants when they used to exist before Doug Ford got rid of them. And basically we had extra funding to try something as a cross-curricular team. And colleagues, I'm at a school that's right near the University of Waterloo, which means that my population all thinks they're going to be engineers. They're not going to all be engineers at the University of Waterloo, but they've all decided they want to be. And so then what they end up doing is they think they're all like brilliant and they're so mark hungry because they all need 99% to get into software engineering, and it drives me bananas. So in an effort we were losing sight of learning. It was all about marks. I need to memorize this. And a kid would come up and argue with me at the end of a test and be like, well, I deserve another half a mark here. And you'd talk to them and you realize they actually have no clue what they're talking about. And they had already gotten 4.5 out of 5 for knowing nothing, but just memorizing something. And that got really frustrating for me. So we decided to ditch the marks completely. And so when you ditch grades, I want to emphasize you're ditching the numerical feedback. So you're going to shift your feedback then. So instead of on a test, we all take the time to write little comments and be like, great work, Johnny, you did great here. Or, hey, next time, why don't you try this? And statistically, when you give a kid a test with marks on it, they will take the test, they will look at the numbers, and they will ignore everything else on it. And the everything else that you've spent all of your time and effort and energy giving them feedback on is actually the value added stuff. The numbers is just kind of giving you your rank. The other stuff's the value and the learning, and they ignore that. So if you get rid of the numbers, then they actually have to read those pieces of information. And so that was really important to us. So it's a shift in your feedback system. So with the ditching your grades, you have a couple different options. Some of you are in the position where you need to do an emergency pivot right now because you were planning on testing over the next 2 weeks while you saw your kids in person, and you don't have that facility to do that anymore. And you're worried about the rampant cheating that is going on like crazy. And you can't blame kids for just wanting to get ahead and do well when you've got all this stuff available to you. The other thing is that we're, as teachers, tend to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Ditching grades allows you to make the kids do some of the heavy lifting, which is a really awesome benefit. And then if you want to go full grade list, the last couple of slides will talk about how to actually ditch the grades like from start to finish, as I would have in the past. So, and am currently in the future also doing that as well. So the trick is, when it comes down to, is basically you have to rethink your assessments. And this one is tough. I went through this process a couple years ago. So I actually met Adam at a Schrodinger's class, and Adam was super inspiring to me in that experience. And in that conference, I started coming out with this idea about spiraling and how to organize my class. And in doing so, I realized I had to throw every assessment that I had made up to that point pretty much out the window, because some of them, like, I guess you just basically have to ask the point, like, what is the point of this assessment? Like, what is the point of this test? What is the point of the assignment? What is the point of this quiz? What is the point of this lab? And there were some that I was hanging on to because I loved them, but when I thought about it, they actually weren't value added or didn't give me bang for my buck. And so one of the first things that I think you need to do is, when you're about to assign something, you have to ask yourself always the question, why am I doing that assignment? And if the answer is because of this, and there's a lot of value and you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, then go run for it. If you go, well, because I love it and I've always run it, and if that's the answer, you're running the assessment, then it may be time, and it's really, really tough to do, but it may be time to Marie Kondo it. You're going to thank it for all the joy it gave you, and then you're going to let it go. And that's how the assessment strategy works. And it's going to be hard because you're going to have to let go of some of your favorite assessments, and it's just the way it's going to be, and it's going to be okay. I promise you, it'll be better. Okay. So ask yourself, what is the assessment capturing? In digital learning, especially if you were doing something primarily for knowledge base. So like, are you testing knowledge and understanding, or are you looking at like more of the application, communication, other things like that? If you are asking a question primarily for knowledge, I want you to ask yourself why. Because when you do those higher order tasks, so for example, if I ask you to go running around your house and grab some materials and demo an experiment or a lab or some kind of hands-on thing that shows the concept we did today. So if we're using like 3U motion, we talked about forces today and we talked about friction. So what you could do is your kids could then run around the house and grab something that has a lot of friction, something has a little friction, and then just show like the pushing of those two items. And when they do that demonstration for you, which is like a hands-on application piece, they're actually showing you the knowledge anyways. So if you were testing, for example, primarily for a knowledge checkbox, you don't actually need to do that because you get to check that box with a lot of the other assessments that you're doing as well. So that might be something to think about, is that especially in digital learning, and when we're seeing them for only a short period of time, perhaps more of the emphasis needs to be on some of the other activities you normally do, because that will check the box of knowledge while it also checks the box of your like lab skills or your communication skills, your ability to connect. And the nice thing too about those other assessment strategies is, if I'm doing just like a test, so if I'm just showing you like my answer, like line by line, right? Or if I'm doing my multiple representations, like some of us are doing now, kids can easily copy that from one to another. But if I ask a kid, All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to talk to me about something you learned today that surprised you. When a kid talks about something they learned today that surprised them, that's authentic and that's them, and it's not them just copying off of someone else. And so that allows you to get an idea of their personality and allows you to see their um, their understanding of what you talked about today. So if you did circular motion in grade 12 and you said, what surprised you today? And the kid goes, that things go in circles. Well, then you know that that's not a very good understanding. And so then that would be like your lower level, like level 1 beginning learning kids. But if a kid at the end says, well, you know, I thought that the whole idea of circular motion was really interesting, and I can't get my head wrapped around this idea that we need a fictitious force because it doesn't make sense to me that we need, like, how can this force happen in all these different categories? And what happens when you're like an electron? Like, wouldn't it just like, and so when they start having these like questions about that, then you're like, oh, you're like a level 4 kid because you're connecting to what we learned about today to what's going beyond. So, with even something as simple as like an exit ticket, which is, so I'll try to do one thing a day because I want to manage my time. I don't want to be crazy. So we, in a hybrid model, will see our kids for 4 hours a day, and then they'll have some time to work on stuff. And then at night, I look at what they've done for the day. So I'll typically ask them to do one of these things that you'll see on the slides here. So I'll get them to do like an exit ticket style question. So that can be something as simple as like, what did you learn about, or what surprised you about what you learned about today? You can get them to solve a problem. So create a problem themselves and solve it, which can get around some of your like cheating and repetition stuff, because everyone's problem should be totally unique. Because if all 30 kids hand in a question about a kangaroo, then I think I know where that all came from, right? But and then the other neat thing that I found that worked really, really well is actually just getting them to walk through their problem solving process. So quite often I'll get a kids and I'll tell them, pick any of the questions we did today in the homework set and upload a video. And so I use Brightspace, so there's video stuff built into it, which is really nice. So basically what they'll do is they'll just record a video of themselves and they'll like hold up the problem and they'll like talk through it, or they'll show me the problem and they'll talk through it. And the nice thing is that we all know from conversations with kids what level they're at. Like, I can have a conversation with you and know, sorry for those in your first year teaching, you probably don't have this like baseline yet, but for everybody else that has been at least through a course once, you get a good baseline about, okay, what's a level 2 kid versus what's a level 4 kid versus what like 100%er kid is. Like, we should be able to put those kids in those categories. And when you ask them to just record a video at the end of the day about how they solve their problems, it's really easy to justify or see them between them. So for example, if we were going to do a classic problem we're all familiar with, which would be like your skier going down a hill. If you had a kid that said, okay, so my skier is going down a hill, you'll see that I've got my initial velocity up here. I was given acceleration. I know the distance down this hill. So then I can solve for V2 using big 5, right? That's a really simplified answer. It doesn't go into a lot of details. So you know they're still in their like beginning developing phase of their learning. If a kid says to you, okay, in the video, they're going to say things like, all right, so we've got our skier and they're on a hill, and we know that it's going to be constant acceleration because we've got gravity pulling them down, but we've got the snow slowing them down. So you're going to get like an acceleration rate, which is constant. We're told they start from rest at the beginning, so you can make the assumption that V1 is 0. Like, do you see how there's extra detail there? And they just naturally go into that extra detail. And then when you look at your level 4+ kids, they're going to be the ones saying, well, we know that this number makes sense because it should be between these ranges, and so it makes sense. Or at the end, they'll say, okay, well, this comes out that the skier is going at the same speed as a jetliner, and that doesn't make sense because people shouldn't ski as fast as planes. So therefore, this doesn't make sense, and it probably fell apart here. And it's the wording that you can easily distinguish your kids into the different level categories. Now, you'll notice that I'm using level categories. I flipped over to levels quite a long time ago. And I use levels as a kind of a baseline. So to my students, we will talk about beginning and then developing and then like approaching a mastery level and then mastering as our continuum. And then at midterm time, we'll pop those out and translate those into what does a level 1, 2, 3, and 4 look like. But throughout the year, I'm always talking about them approaching mastery. So I only ever actually bring up the level speak at midterm and final time when we have to determine those grades. But for the most part, we'll be seeing kind of just like that. I always talk about like developing your learning, you're approaching mastery, or you've mastered. So we'll use that kind of language and terminology with them throughout the year. And so that's kind of how an example of Gradeless. So this is an example of a bunch of different assessments you could use in replacement of your test that would still get at what your point of your test was, right? And they can still gather some of that information and data that you need. I'll talk about skill stuff later. So what Gradeless basically focuses on is taking away the numbers, and you're going to tell them what they did well and what they can improve on. In an approach to tell them what they did well and what they can improve on, there's a couple different systems you can use. You can use words, you can type words, you can do video notes, you can do auditory notes. There's tons of examples online. I love I've set a one-to-one discussion board up through my Brightspace stuff. So I'll have a back and forth with each of my students easily. So then I just quickly type out responses or voice or video note back and forth with them all the time. And that's a really easy way for me to communicate with them where they're doing and how they're doing. When I'm in person, this is an example of like what my test would look like when I was handing stuff back to them. So I'm writing in the green pen there. So you'll see the green pen is kind of, I'll write awesome right here, or you don't need to do this, because I want them to continue doing some things, but I also want them to improve on something. So I'll tell them things they're doing really well and tell them things that they need to improve on. And then I also use a color system because my students needed a benchmark. Like I can give you a ton of feedback, but they weren't really 100% sure on where they stood in terms of that mastery continuum. So I use a red light, green light system. So if they get orange or pink, which is my red light, that means that we have a big gap between like where we are currently and where we would be if we had mastered that concept. Yellow light would mean we're getting close to that mastery level, and green would mean you have mastered that section. So that's kind of how I would mark a test. The first test tends to take a lot longer to mark than the last one because there's a lot of behaviors you want to continue and a lot of behaviors you want to tweak and change. So the first test does take longer than a normal test to mark, but by the time you're on the last test or assessment in the year, you're flying and it's really, really quick. So just in terms of balancing your time out, as if you're going to go whole hog and get rid of numbers on your assessments and things like that, in a testing capacity in a normal year, then yes, you would have that. But if you're in a place where you're not having tests, so for tomorrow, if you wanted to have a quick check-in to see how they're doing in whatever you're teaching them, then you could easily just give them one of those exit tickets or something like that. And then it's just a quick little response back and forth in that dialogue. So that's just some examples of some kind of assessments that you could do if you wanted to on that capacity. I have really embraced using self-reflection from students because I find that it's a really beneficial tool and helps them really take ownership of their learning. The whole point of school is to learn. And we have really lost sight of that in a lot of cases because we're so mark hungry and mark driven and pushing them towards the next future university, whatever, or we need to get through all this content. And how do you get through all this content? And I think if nothing else from this pandemic you can learn is that you do not need to hit every specific expectation, right? You're legally mandated to hit every overall expectation, not every specific expectation. So give yourself some permission to let some of that content go. We had a discussion as a team, and because we're close to University of Waterloo, we're really lucky that way. So we've had that conversation about what in grade 11 can slide, what can slide in grade 12, and have talked to the upper layers to make sure that that was lining them up for success in first year university, which has been really nice. But that's something for you to, it's hard the first time you go through and don't check all the boxes of your specific expectations, but give yourself permission to, because it's really beneficial and it'll save you a lot of grief in the end. Okay. So self-reflection. So self-reflection happens in 3 different ways for me when I'm talking about students. So self-reflection happens in kind of like a daily capacity. Self-reflection happens in like a full year capacity. And as we're moving along through our learning, as they are constantly checking back to where they want to be, where they are currently and where they want to go. Benefits of self-reflection. One is they actually have to learn. Two, they have to figure out where they are between where they are currently and where their baseline is. And three, it actually really helps with that 21st century competencies. If we want somebody that's able to communicate and can work in groups and collaborate and be effective with their time and all of the other great, awesome skills they need to be functioning in the 21st century and being able to critical thinkers, self-reflection really, really helps with that one. So that's something you definitely want to consider. So for self-reflection, for me, it happens in kind of three key areas. One is in their portfolios. So I'm constantly having students document as they go through examples of mastery or examples like snapshots in time of where they are at that moment. So this is an example of an old Google platform. So I flipped over to Brightspace this year. Last year I was fully Google. So what I did was I used Doctopus to push out this like template of a rubric. So basically it has on the sides down were all the units and kind of the key ideas that we would talk about in each of those units. And then across the top, there were 4 columns. When one was like a labs, one was their ability to connect, one was communication, and then one was knowledge and understanding. So when they had demonstrated, for example, a lab of waves and sounds, then they did a quick snapshot of this is a demonstration of me understanding waves, and then threw a picture into here. And so this was just a live doc that me and the student would have back and forth to record pictures of. Brightspace has that tool built into it through the portfolio. So essentially then I'll just encourage students that whenever they're doing an example of something that they've decided demonstrates their mastery, then they'll throw a picture of whatever they're doing or a screenshot or an image or upload a doc or even a video or something like that to demonstrate their mastery across kind of the key areas. So my recommendation for my portfolios for my kids, we start this at the beginning of the year. By midterm time, you should have 1 picture in each of the boxes. And if you're going to argue for me for a 90+ mark at the end of the year, then you should have 3 pictures in each box by the end of the year, because you should have evidence of mastery multiple times. So I think like a lot of us would assume that a 90% or above kid should be able to demonstrate like a high level of achievement more than once. So then I'll say they have to have demonstrated mastery in a concept 3 times. And so then they should have pictures of them like acing or being awesome at something 3 times across those categories. And somebody was asking about sharing resources. Chris has a Google Drive that we can drop stuff into. So I'll drop some exemplars of like some of my rubrics and tools into there, so you guys can see those after the presentation if you want to take a look at them in a bit more detail, because this is just an image of one of my students' work. So I'm using portfolios to kind of track progress as we go. For me personally, I have the course broken down into skills that I want them to demonstrate. So 3U, I think it's down to 37, which is a lot. Skills that I want to see out of them by the end of the year. And I can just keep it binaries, 1s and 0s. So once they've shown me that skill and have like at a high level of success or a high level of understanding, then I'll put a 1. So it's basically a Google Sheet, skills across the top, kids down the side. And then I just like populate it with 1s and 0s. So then if they haven't demonstrated it, then it's 0s. If it's one of those concepts where they've demonstrated some of it, but they're still not quite there, sometimes I'll put like a dashed line in there and that's basically my mark book. It's just a bunch of like 1s and 0s. You got it or you don't. And then at the end of the year, when they say, hey, McP, I deserve a 96, I'm like, awesome. And then I take a quick look and they should have just like a full 1s across the board. And if they do, then I'm like, yeah, awesome. Here's your 96. Enjoy your day. And if they are missing half of the skills, then we have a conversation. I'm like, I'm missing half of the skills. Like, why do you think you deserve a 96? And that opens up some really awesome conversations there too. So that's portfolios. After an assessment is also a really great spot to do self-reflection. Chris has some really great post-test self-reflection pieces where kids can look at a test and say, these are the skills I've mastered. These are the ones that I still have to demonstrate. And I think those resources are still up on his website. I don't know if he still has them there or not. But in terms of like just even after your own assessment, so at the end of a test or an assignment or whenever we're in class and doing something, the last question on the test is always like, how do you feel after this assessment? Do you feel you were prepared? Do you feel you did enough to get ready for this? Do you think this was harder or easier than you had anticipated? Because I think that quick little reflection, like coming out of an assessment, is really important for kids, because they can be like, oh, I wasn't prepared at all, and this is what I need to do better next time, or I over prepared and I was awesome. after getting feedback, if you have like a lower level grade 9 or 10, then what I always had was like a feedback log. And after handing something back to them, I would give them time to enter it into their feedback log so they can kind of track like what's going really well and what they need to improve on. And then if their improve on is a repeating thing, then they can start noticing trends and we can highlight how we can fix those things. And then with the grade 11s, I leave it a bit more open-ended and let them kind of do their own thing. Goal tracking, always relating back to your goal in your course. I have them set goals at the beginning of the year. Where are we on our progression towards getting our goals? And then also the other easy little self-reflection thing is instead of you marking it, you have them do it. And then you should give them the solution set. And then you have them mark up their work with the solution set and then have them comment on where they went wrong. So like actually writing the words like, oh, I made this assumption and it's not constant velocity, so I can't use V over equals D over T all the time here. So these are the kinds of things that you can do to do after an assessment. And then midterm time and final mark time, this is what I get them to do. So I give them kind of like a list of like I can statements that they should have been able to do, and then have them translate that to a level and give me a justification as to why they think they deserve like a level 3+ or a 4+ or whatever. And then it takes them about an hour. They fill this all out and then they hand it in to me. And at the bottom of that says, I think based off of the above, I deserve, or a fair numeric range of marks for me is, and then they'll write in like 85 to 90 or 92 to 97 or whatever mark range they think they deserve. And then based off of that, then that's where I cue in my conversation with them. So I would say for the most part, about 90% of the time, I'm in agreement with them, especially if you ask for a 5% range, you'll probably overlap with them. And then whatever number you overlap with them on, then that's what you give them. When we moved digital, I just moved levels. So instead of asking for like an 82 to an 87, I would ask them instead for like a level 4- to a 4 or a 4 to a 4+. Like I'd ask them for a level range and then ideally we overlap on a level there. About 5% of people will over ask for what they deserve, and then a quick conversation with them and being like, you know what, really, do you think you deserve the level 4? They'll be like, I just was asking for it. I didn't actually think I deserved it. I feel like I'm actually here. And you're like, awesome. That's actually where I feel you are too. Awesome. So then we'll be good, move on. And then girls typically undervalue themselves. And that's big, especially when it comes to, like, we all talk about like the wage differences and the gaps and stuff. It's because females aren't used to asking for what they deserve. And so this is the first chance for them to practice that, so that when they get into those meetings later on and they're like, I deserve a raise, then they'll feel a bit more comfortable asking for a raise because they're good at saying, this is what I deserve. And this is, I'm valuable because I can offer this, this, and this, and this, and this to the company. So it's like their first performance appraisal. It's just in high school instead of out there in the real world. So I am aware of time because I know it's 8 o'clock. So just, I'll do one more minute just to wrap it up. Basically, I can talk to you more fully about going gradeless if you want to. I have my information on this last slide, so then you can, I love this Jonah Hill one. That just makes me feel so happy. Okay. So my information's up here. So send me an email or send me, I'm pretty active on Twitter, so you can also tweet at me if you want that as well. But essentially if you're going to go gradeless full out, the trick is to have a conversation with parents and students right out of the gate that this is kind of how it's going to work. Focus on the fact that you're still giving them feedback, and it'll be value added feedback because you're going to tell them what they're doing great and what they need to work on. And that you will legally still have to give them 2 numbers at midterms and finals. And overall, the parent community has been pretty awesome about this stuff because it is in the best interest of their kids, because you're putting them on a continuum where they can always show improvement, right? You're not going to penalize them for their mistakes. You're going to embrace their mistakes and allow them to learn from them and keep pushing and get further instead of penalizing them. And that's a big win for parents. So they are typically pretty on board with that. So anyways, I'll wrap that up there because I want to be respectful of people's time. But thanks for listening, and I'll stop sharing here. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ashley. There was one question that's gotten lost in the chat box on what your 3 boxes were again that were inside that self-reflection portfolio or the
Oh, so for the portfolio, basically across the top, I have the 4 key. You can think of like your Kika categories. I break mine down into like understanding fundamentals, your ability to apply. So that would be like in a lab demo, that kind of stuff. Your ability to connect to the real world, and then your ability to communicate. And the communicates where I bring in a lot of that multiple representation stuff. So can you show it in a picture? Can you show it in words? Can you show it with physics? Can you show it with math? And then that like evaluation section, the like, does that number make sense piece? That would be then their connection piece there too, if you're using that kind of standard framework for multiple representation stuff. So yeah.
There's a couple more in the chat box there, I think you
Okay.
can see.
Yes. All right. Dun, dun, dun.
Never mind, Lisa just wrote a paragraph to push them all up.
It's all good. Admin on board from the beginning. Yeah. So our principal. Okay, I'm gonna toot my own horn. That TLP team was part of the people I worked with were like your like 5 superstars from your staff. So I feel like sometimes admin, like when your 5 superstars are like, I want to get this awesome grant money and bring lots of money into this school and try something new. Our admin was like, yeah, go for it. So that was nice. It also worked out well that one of our VPs had been Gradeless before and had dabbled in it. So that was a really easy support from the admin standpoint. So they were super on board with us right at the beginning. And then yes. And yeah, so always giving them opportunities to improve and stuff. That's always really important. And Lisa, you're right. Yeah. Focusing on growth and learning and having the students prove that they learned it is a really easy thing to do. Aaron says he has a question about the elite who need to get 95. I teach AP physics too. So hit me because I've got a class at 34 of those right now. Right.
Well,
admin has changed people. Yeah. So we have had new administrators and they're still on board, but yeah, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I don't really know how to phrase my question that well. You know, we have different characters. There are different, if this was a video game or movie, different students would be different characters, and there's certain archetypes. And one of them is that A++ student, or at least a student who thinks they're going to go to the elite program. So they need the 96. And sometimes it's a problem with them because they're not at that level, but they're pushing against their mark all the time to get there. And throughout the term, when there's grades, at least there's a way for them to come to terms. The ones that aren't going to make it to that 95 at the end, there's a term for them to come to terms to the fact. And they're the ones that are grubbing for grades, but at the same time, they can see the mark slip between their hands, but really what they're hopefully realizing is that they don't have the understanding. My worry about them with the grade list is that there's no opportunity for them to realize that there's a mismatch between their expectations and their success until it's too late. And then it can be a real conflict of personalities. But I have no experience with this, so I don't know if that's true. So can you tell me about that?
So really early on in the class, in the first couple of weeks, you have to establish like what mastery is, right? I need to give you a baseline for it. So my definition of mastery, especially to those like high-end, like AP group of kids, is if I was sick, I would need to leave my lesson behind. And if you think that you are like a 95+% kid, I should be able to write in my own teacher's notes, leave the class with so-and-so. They know this so well, they can teach it to everybody else in the class. And then I also say that I should be able to see you teaching other people, right? Like, so if you are saying you're a 95 kid, then you should be on the growth continuum to the point where you're able to teach because you understand it so well. So I should often see you in the class teaching other students or helping other students. You should be the person kids are going to if you want that number. And so it's really quickly early on. And the nice thing about that midterm mark evaluation piece too, is the kids will, when they're doing that self-reflection at midterm, which isn't for us, like in quad masters, it's totally different, but normally in a year that would be like October. Right. So I would be like mid-October time. They would start doing that reflection piece and they would be like, well, I deserve a 96. I'm like, hey, so when's the last time you helped somebody in this room? And then they look at it and they're like, And I'm like, right. And that's it. And so then it's always just having that dialogue there. And so I think that that's how I've nipped that in the bud. It's been pretty, yeah, it's pretty good. And it, like, I haven't had that problem so far. You do have the odd kid that argues with you. And then, to be honest with you, you always have one superstar, and you always have that kid that's not that superstar that thinks they're the superstar. And then the nice thing for, like, it's not great, but I'll always end up doing, okay, so you're telling me you deserve the same mark as that person? And they're like, and I'm like, yeah, I thought so. So let's go back and rethink about what we actually, like, where are we? Because right now you're saying you're that person, and I would argue that you're not at that level of connecting to the real world and stuff like that too. And that's a nice thing too with connections too, right? So if a kid can make connections to what we've learned or what we're going to learn or what they've seen in the real world and do that really instantaneously, then that means, like, that really helps them realize that where they are on that continuum too. So that I always have them evaluate their final answer as to whether that number they had made sense. And so in that evaluation section, it's really easy for me to rip into the kids that are your 80%ers versus who your 95ers are. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I think just for the sake of time here, we'll just say some thank yous, and I'm sure our presenters won't mind staying around for a couple more minutes if there are some other questions. So first off, thank you to our presenters, Melissa and Ashley. Very good stuff. For those of you that participated and came today, thank you very much. Our next one is going to be on February 11th, and it will be with Olga Mikopoulos and Dave Fish talking about black holes. Also, just a couple plugs for the OAPT. We are always looking for volunteers. So if you liked some of the stuff that you saw, think about helping out. And particularly, one little way that you could start is by writing newsletters. And if you are interested in writing a newsletter about some awesome idea that you have, doesn't need to be super long, please send it to Vajera. And other than that, thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you next time.
Brian is still here. Okay, awesome. Sorry, Brian, because I didn't get to your message earlier, or your question earlier about how I started. I think that you basically, first strategy is figure out what are your key skills in your course. So break your course down to, like, your key skills. So for me, I've actually pared that down even more so to, I think I'm down to just over 20 for distance learning, because we are so restricted in how much time we have with our hybrid model here in Waterloo. So I think I have mine just over 20. So you basically come up with your skills set first, and then come up with an assessment plan based off of that, the skills that you want to see them by the end of the year. So some skills you can test on or use, like, one assessment to do multiple skills, and sometimes you do it just individually throughout. So that's how I've set my stuff up. But yeah.
So sorry, okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Sorry, one more question.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved your clear line between 80 and 90. Do you have similar clear lines? So for borderline between 70 and 80, let's say, or between 60 and 70? Because I really love the idea that if you pretend that you want to be 90, you should be able to teach or help other students. So have you thought about the borderlines between, let's say, 70 and 80?
For me, a 70 to an 80, it comes down to the content that they struggle with, to be honest with you. So, like, if I'm teaching like a 3U course, if a kid can get the vector stuff, like projectiles, or if you're in a grade 12 class, if the kids can understand, like, fields and some of that, like some of the more complicated topics, then that tends to split the kids into the 70-80 category. The other way you can think about it is if a kid can take an answer and recognize if it makes sense, if it's right or wrong or not, and get the correct answer most of the time, then that would be like your 80% kid. And a kid that is still kind of working their way through, or needs to refer back to their notes to do their work all the time, or still needs to ask for questions and help and supports all the time, that would be more of your like 60s or 70s. And the amount of help they need would be where they fall in that 60 to 70 category. It just really just comes down to more the styles of questions they're asking. So if they're asking the question of like, I know how to start this question. I just don't know how to get from, like, I know I'm here and I need to get here. How do I get from here to here? And it's those style, like that's the conversations you have with kids tend to give me the best answer as to whether they fall into the 70s or 80s category. And like, if you can do, on the other side too, I also spiral my content. So I go through all 5 units at a like low level, and then, well, not a low level, a base level. We establish a base, and then we come back and we go over it again. We build on the complicatedness of it, and then we go back and build again, and build even more on how complicated the content is. And so if you can get through those first 2 cycles, then that would be your like level, like your 60s kid and 70s kid. And then if you can get through level 3, then that's your 80s kid. But
Thanks so much.
that's how I do it. Yeah. Yeah, some of my colleagues actually are in biology. And if you wanted to send me an email, I can connect you with Jess, because she's an awesome human. So she would be happy to help you out, Nicole, as well, if Nicole's still here.
Can you share your list with skills that you have right now that you're using for the virtual, for the hybrid model?
Yeah, it's ugly because I'm using, I tried using the Brightspace grade system. Did you know there's a grade book built into Brightspace?
Yes, I do know there is, but you have to manually enter as far as I know.
Right, and its spit out is really ugly because it's really long, and it's not like half. It's ugly. I am not a fan of it. I will be using Sheets next year, but I started with it, so I'm just continuing to run with it. Let me see if it will let me do that.
No, also another question, when you do a spiraling, how long do you spend on the first spiral, second spiral, third spiral? Like, how do you divide time, and where do you differ on the not on the concept that they learn, but the difficulty of the problems that they're solving when going back? Or
so the spiral for the 3U is really solid. For 4U, I haven't taught 4U since I redid all this stuff, because I've only been teaching like my AP 4U class, which is a different, like the content is totally different. So what I did with them is we did real world problem of the week, and then figured out like all the physics we had to learn to be able to solve that real world problem. And then that's kind of how I organized my grade 12 course, is by real world problems of the week. And the spiraling is my 3U class, because I haven't taught a 4U where I can spiral yet. Are you familiar with the AP program? Because it's
no, we don't offer that. We're just,
it's such a ridiculously dense amount of content, and I just don't have enough time in a semester to be able to spiral it and get through all the content, because basically I'm running all of grade 11 and most of grade 12 in a semester in AP 1.
Okay,
but I can show you so let me see if the grade book stuff will show up nicely. It's pretty ugly right now. It might be easier for me just to give you a skills list later. Here, let me pull up my drive and see if I can do that.
Because I did spiraling when I was teaching math. I was teaching grade math, and I found that that worked well. That worked well with those students.
Yeah.
But I haven't done it, and with the 3U nor 4U. So I'm just curious.
So here, let me see if I
hesitant and scared.
No, it's fine. So I don't know if you can you read that? Do I need to zoom it in more? So first spiral is this one. So we talk about like scalars and vectors, one like basically this is all V equals D over T is your first spiral. And then second spiral is about like how we go. So like your forces, and then get into a little bit of like action reaction stuff. And then in the third spiral, it's applying go. So then we talk about like the big 5: projectile motion, Doppler, transformers, electromagnetism, mixed circuits, heat as like a byproduct of energy problems, conservation of energy, that kind of stuff. So that's how I've spiraled 3U before. And I can absolutely share this with you if you want it. Oh, it's disappearing.
That would be great.
Yeah. And I can drop that into the box as well. Other people have looked at this and said like, Ashley, this is not how I would organize my course at all. And that's totally fine with you. Basically, I looked at like, what do kids struggle with? Vectors, figuring out what equation, when to use them. And then with like, I tried to just then each build. So for waves, your beginning would be like your v equals f lambda. And then you get into some more like kind of like weird, like wave behavior patterns. And then you get into like your standing waves. And then you use standing waves as like music and stuff like that. So then you get into like air columns. And then with your electricity stuff, you do like your simple like V equals I R formulas, and then you start putting those into like circuits, and then you get more complicated circuits. So that would be cycle 3. And then for like graphing, you do your DT graphs, and then the next one is you do your DT VT AT graphs, and then you would use them to solve problems. Like, so that's kind of the process I've done. I don't know if that helps at all, but, and then I'm trying to think, where did I put, my drive is full of everything. Where did I put it? It was under for students, I think. No, it was under here. So this is like what I did for their midterm mark justification. And I don't know if you can see that. So then basically then they had their like 4 key categories. So like your ability to like connect to the real world, your like lab skills. We still did labs and stuff even online because we just did them from home. And then communication skills, and then your foundational knowledge across the 5 units. So that kind of still held true for me from future, but I'll put all this stuff into the drive for you guys to take a look at and dig through and stuff like that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would really appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. For the checklist of skills, Michelle, yeah, it's literally 1 if you got it, 0 if you don't. Let me go back. So like my mark book in the past, let me see if it's here. I think it is. Where's my marks from last year? Nope.
I guess my question is to Ashley, if they demonstrate it, then that goes as a 1. Do they have to consistently demonstrate it?
No, it's just once you've done it, you're done it.
Okay.
Yeah. So once you're done, you check the box, you move on. And if at the end of the year you're still not done, then you have the exam as your like last like Hail Mary pass as to whether you can go with it. The other thing I didn't talk about, your marking stuff. So when I used to do grades, I would see about a 10% drop between like regular marks and then their exam marks. I don't know if you guys see a drop when you do your exams as well. And then when I flipped over to Gradeless and had them self-report marks, the self-reported marks was within a percentage of their exam mark. And I marked exams in like a traditional marking sense because I wanted, before we went virtual, I wanted data to back up that the like online, the Gradeless system worked. So I marked the exam like I normally would with like numbers as I always did. And the kids would self-report like I deserve an 83 in the course, and then they would get like an 84 on the final exam. And it was crazy how tight and lined up they came out. So that was really cool for me to see that. And yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to find my last year's skill list because it's just hidden. Actually, there's one right here. So then this one. So this is my, now mind you, this is like my AP class. So that's why there's so many 1s across here, because those kids are like pretty awesome and dynamo and quite smart. So they're just like highlighted by color at the top based off of the unit that they were talking about. So this was just like my mark book basically. So then this kid's names on the left, skills across the top, and then just 1s and 0s. And then I threw dashes in if they were nearly there, but not quite there yet. And that's pretty much how I did marks for last year. So sorry. And then this is the AP content too, right? So some of the stuff you wouldn't normally do in grade 11. So this is technically a grade 11 class, but we do still talk about like elastic energy, circular motion, that kind of stuff. So it was, you'll see a little bit of a crossover there, which is weird. And it's just because of what we have to talk about for AP stuff, which is a little different. So in terms of, Andrea, to answer your question, I just, You can use different inks. I just don't like marking in red. So I just always mark in green because that just is a happy color to me. It makes me feel calm when I'm marking, even though I want to like dig my pen through the paper. So I just use green there. And then the colored highlighters are based off of different things. So I have my highlighters set as like mastery levels. A friend of mine has her highlighter system as like your common things that you're always writing to kids, like explain more, or you picked the wrong equation, or you like your physics here is completely bonkers, like that kind of stuff. And so she'll have a color coding system. So blue means this, purple means this, orange means this, and that's how she marks her stuff. So she's just highlighter happy. Sorry,
Can I
Louise.
just ask another question, Ashley?
for
This
it,
is, I mean, this stuff is amazing. And I'm not sure how you have like 600 hours in your day in order to do this. Like, what's your secret?
I don't have 600 hours in my day. This has been like a labor of love over 5 years of like, just like slowly tweak as we go. Yeah. And then I have like a 6 and a 4-year-old too. So right now it's all about just survival, to be honest with you, but
Yeah, I've got 2 4-year-olds and I'm like, feedback? Okay. What's that?
I did too much of it early on in the year. I was doing it nightly, and then I started making boundaries for myself and cutting myself off at about 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night. So I tell the kids that I'm going to be on at 8. So if they have questions or need anything, because my kids go to bed a little earlier, so I always tell them I'll be on at 8, and then I can help them until later. And that's when I get all of my emails and everything like that from them in a flurry between 8 and 10. And that's when we do the one-to-one back and forth stuff. So yeah, sorry, Carmen, to cut you off there.
Oh no, I just want to thank you. Like, this is so overwhelmingly so much word of wisdom. So I guess my quick question, it's not gonna be a quick answer. It's like, if I wanted to start, where should I start? Like, you were like so much stuff, and I'm like, okay, do I come up with a list? Do I like, I don't know. It's just, you might not have an answer. Maybe another PD for 5 hours.
I know. Where to start? So I would start first off with like if you wanted to do something tomorrow, then I would just start off with like your assessment strategy for the next 2 weeks. So like, are you going to, instead of doing a test, try getting them to like just tomorrow say, okay, guys, at the end of the day, I don't know what platform you're using. Brightspace has the video stuff built right in, which is beautiful. If you're a Google board, then they all have YouTube channels. So you just get them to upload something as unlisted on YouTube and send you the link, and then they can just walk you through their question. Right. And so then it's like, a couple of kids. Oh yeah, you can use Flipgrid as well. I don't know, Andrea, can you do Flipgrid so that not everybody else can see it? It's just one-to-one. Because I've only ever used Flipgrid as like a whole
Get the kids to do Cami.
You can choose. Sorry, you can choose. You can either say it so everybody can see it, or just you can see it.
Okay, cool. So you can get the kids to do that through Flipgrid then too, and just have them explain a question tomorrow, and just like say, pick a problem and that they feel most confident with, and explain how they went about solving it, focusing on your process, not on the actual like steps that you took. And your thought, like explain your thought process to me about why you did these things that you did and why. And that's kind of a really easy way to open it up. And then moving into next semester, when you're doing your design, my first thing I would do is to start thinking about your course and skills. So like, what are the key things? Like you already probably do it naturally, as like, what are my look fors? Right. And just verbalize those as these are my skills that I want to see by the end of the year. And then just make sure that you have an assessment at least once or twice throughout the semester that allows them to show that skill. And then that's kind of your first 2 key stepping stones. And then just start moving away from the numbers and towards more of the other forms of feedback. And
the number is so hard.
I know it's a hard one. You got to just shake it off.
I do that demonstration of knowledge. I do like, you know, the evidence and even the explaining the problem. But I still cannot detach from the mark when I'm assessing that thing. So I think your checklist would be helpful. Like I think your checklist is the first PD that I've been to that actually gives me something solid that will provide a number at the end.
Yeah.
But I just really like your description of what you're looking for. It's like so in the head, but it's so.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Did my internet just die? Oh.
No, she's frozen up on us.
Okay.
Sorry,
Thanks for
Carmen.
coming.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so I don't, so I'm still using grades, but I don't like grades. So I really like to switch to Gradeless, and would really like to start. So I actually wanted to ask Carmen's question, where do I actually start from? Like, it's not that I'm doing those things. I am doing those things, but not officially. So I don't officially have a list. I don't officially have a set of skills that the students also have access to. So
so what I do is in virtual world, I did a video explaining like Gradeless to parents and kids and sent that, like, I have a YouTube channel and I just like fired like videos out of explaining it and things. And then I also have like a welcome letter to parents and stuff like that. So I wonder if maybe I can put some of that stuff into the drive that Chris sent out, or Chris is going to send out, and then I can put some of those resources there for you to see kind of how I get my course started up and how I get across to parents and students about what this looks like. Because it can be really hard if you are first, like at least with the first year I did it, it was tough because you have to get parents to buy in and it's like a lot of work. But then once they realize it's for the benefit of their kid and the kid is going to be self-advocating for themselves and the kid has multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery, then they're like, the parents all on board and totally fine. I was really worried because some of our parent population is professors from the University of Waterloo. So I was a little concerned about what the professor community would be like. And they were actually really on board, which was shocking to me, to be honest with you. I thought they would be my biggest critics, but they were the biggest ones to jump on the train first, which I was super excited about. So I'll organize kind of some of files. So like self-reflection stuff and then like get startup stuff. And I'll just put them in a couple different files and share those in the drive that Chris will pop out. Yeah.
Because I do love giving feedback to kids, of course, and I do that all the time. But I always had a problem assigning a number to is it 1, 2, 3 for what we like. So I really love levels. I prefer levels and over numbers, though I'm still using numbers just by, I don't know, inertia. I'm just kind of going with that, and I would like to change that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And Andrea, yeah, it would be, I've talked to some teachers that have done it and it has been nerve-wracking. I still have members of my own science department that think I'm totally cuckoo bananas. And I think it's, yeah. And this year, I was previously put up against some very traditional and some very beloved physics teachers, and that made it very difficult to jump out and do my own thing, because the kids would be in their other classes and like the other teachers were like those like ones that are the, you know, the staples of the school that everybody loves and blah, 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 blah. So it was really hard for me to break the mold, but it was, for me personally, it was worth it in the end. So it was a little bit extra headbutting at the beginning, but when the kids came out with really strong exam results, that ended up proving to everyone and shut them up pretty quickly. So that was really good. So yeah. Because we do the same exam. I don't know if you're in the same boat. So we do the same exam across all the, like, so I'm in a school, I'm lucky. We have 5 sections of 3U and typically 4 or 5 sections of 4U physics that run every year. So we have the same exam for all our 3U kids. So when my kids outperformed the other classes and the 3U exam on a gradeless system, then that kind of backed me up a little bit, which was nice. So yeah.
Well, I'm sure it's not only because it's a gradeless system, but also the style of teaching and approaching, right?
Probably, yeah. You take a little bit of Chris's stuff and a little bit of this and you mash them all together to make it your own. So yeah.
Yes, yes. I think we should, use the best that's out there and help students, right, to learn, because that's what we get kicked out of. I guess. But I would, as I said, like I personally would really like to switch, and since I've always been the only physics teacher in every school that I worked. And no conversation, no.
That's really hard.
The other teachers in the science department are pretty traditional. There's still PowerPoints going on, and put for majority of classes. And yeah, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
And
it's on my list
Andrea.
of things to do as well.
Really fun.
So as I said, like feedback, that's the most self-reflection is the most self-evaluation, all those things, and those things are happening, but I still have numbers associated. I do not like that. Because I cannot justify, even in my own head, why am I doing this? You know, why is it this way, not that? I mean, I can argue both ways, but and I don't like that in my practice. So I'm not happy.
Well, we have to make you happy.
Yeah, like school and job is not my life, but it has to be meaningful. So I have to put some more meaningfulness into this.
Yeah. And I think that you're halfway there. The trick with Gradeless is being able to embrace gray. I think a lot of people see the world as black and white, and they see marks that allow them to be like black and white. And I think that people have to recognize there's some gray there, because I really always struggle with like, okay, well, what's the difference between a 96 and a 97? Like I can tell you the difference between like a 95 kid and a 99 kid, but how do I really distinguish like a 96 or a 97? Like how do I really, so.
Yeah. As scientists, we know that it's really plus or minus 3 or 4%.
Yeah.
Just depending on the day of the week.
True.
And Milica, I had a moment during my first quad, because I was doing grade 11 online and in person. And by the end of the course, especially with the process that we use, I'd collected so much work from each individual student. And I had seen so many of my colleagues struggling to deal with assessment in class and online. And I was thinking, I could guess the grades of each of these students without doing an exam, without doing a test, because I've seen so much of their individual personal work. So that was another sort of light bulb going on moment. I was thinking, yeah, we really don't need these sorts of things. If we have a good, carefully structured learning process, getting lots of feedback from the teacher, then it's really not necessary. It's not any less accurate a way of measuring the student's level of understanding or their skills in physics.
Yeah. Well, yes, like I do have, right, understanding where the student is, and especially you talk to them every day, you see their work every day, you know where they're coming from. But and yes, you're right, there is so much evidence, but it's still in my head, the way kind of I need to jump is to formalize that a little bit more, I guess. I don't know if that's the appropriate and the correct word that I'm supposed to use. And so I do have, but you're right, we do have lots of evidence and lots of, as I said, like when I look into each kid's handbook, and we go and I do talk to them and speak and see how they write, and there's lots of evidence for that. It's just going through.
Yeah, so I think for you and I, for example, it would actually be much easier to switch to this gradeless process than it might be for other teachers. Because I remember 20 years ago when I taught in the past, I would see maybe 10 pieces of work from a student in an entire course. But now I see 40, 50, and it's totally different.
Yes, it is. Yes, yes, it is. And also, when I was, so my experience when I was teaching in a virtual classroom, and I gave them an assessment, and it was, some teachers asked me, like, am I worried that they're going to cheat? But even, what they were providing to me as an evidence on their assessment went along with every other evidence that they had, like through the handbook, through the conversation. So it was it was easier to see whether it's authentic, and it was authentic. Even if they tried to cheat and write, you catch on those, hey, this is not right there, and where's this coming from, and how come all of a sudden this is there, and this is how I've seen you doing, and what is this, where is that? So there is a conversation with that. So I wasn't worried that much about not recognizing whether the work is authentic, and if I recognize to have a conversation with them. So that part was easy to me. When I looked and I see and then I have all this other evidence, as I said, like from the handbook and from the conversation, to talk and ask, where is this coming from, and to double check the understanding. So which I've did in few times. So that's good. I think that, I hope that our transition is going to be easier, because
you're already there, because you're already like, a lot of Chris's, like a lot of the collaborative group work stuff, some of the questions, the way they're scaffolded, have some really good, like, well, like intuitive, you know what I mean? Like big world thinking, real world, like connecting pieces to it. And that's already asking your like high level mastery stuff, right? And it's just translating it. Have they mastered the skill? Yes or no, right? And you guys have already kind of got it built into skills and stuff. You'll have a really easy transition, I think, to the other one. And then Andrea, I literally just printed off my ones and zeros sheet and fired that and with my exam, and that's what I gave admin at the end of the year. They can call me if they have a problem with my marks at the end of the year, but yeah.
No, but I mean, if it's coming from the student side, then
yeah. So there's a bundle of their like end of year like self-reflections, like, so I had them handwrite out like what mark they thought they deserved. So I printed out their mark justification. They handwrite it all in. Well, in digital world, I have a digital copy of it now. So then literally in my little package for admin in my mailbox at the end of the year was their personal like self-reflections, and then my ones and zeros with a printout of like what my actual marks were that went into, we used gradebook. So I just did my gradebook printout for their marks, and that's how I did it, Andrea. So yeah.